What happens when we stop trying to control everything and embrace the unexpected?
Technology is nearly always made for historical reasons, to do something faster or cheaper or bigger, and then it almost immediately starts producing things that nobody ever thought they wanted to make before.
My guest today is artist, producer, and self-described non-musician Brian Eno.
I can see from the little acquaintance I have with using AI programs to make music that what you spend nearly all your time doing is trying to stop the system becoming mind-numbingly mediocre.
But despite its mediocrity, Brian is set on breaking the mold, like he always does.
All my misgivings about AI really are to do with the fact that it's owned by a group of people that I don't trust at all. I don't trust their taste, I don't trust their morals, and I don't trust their politics. And that's a problem for me, that the whole technology is in the hands of the wrong people.
Welcome to Life with Machines, powered by Lenovo. I'm Baratunde Thurston. He invented ambient music. He shaped the sounds of people like David Bowie and Talking Heads and U2. Brian Eno has been redefining creativity for decades. Listen, he's been using technology to create generative art since long before that became a buzzword. And in this age of generative AI, his insights offer a masterclass for artists and creators navigating this new frontier. But before we get into the latest in tech and art and AI, we gotta rewind the clock to find out what gave Brian that initial spark. His latest book, What Art Does, explores how art is made by all of us, how it creates communities, opens our minds, and can even transform us. What sticks out as an early moment where you connected with technology?
The first machine that really made a difference to my creative life, I guess, was the tape recorder. I always wanted to have a tape recorder. I was fascinated by them. And I thought the one thing I really wanted to do was to hear sounds backwards. Now, that everybody can do that now, but in the 1950s, when I was thinking about this, I was just fascinated. I would try to imagine what things would sound like if they were backwards. And I tried to talk backwards. I tried to imagine, in fact, with some friends at school, we developed a sort of language where we would reverse words. And we could talk quite fluently in it for a while. And it was just a thing, how amazing that you can turn time around. And so I wanted a tape recorder very badly and asked my parents several birthdays in a row whether I could have one, but they were too expensive. But then I went to art school and they had a tape recorder. And that was when I first seriously started messing around with music. I didn't play any instruments, as I still don't really. I just pretend. I know how to bluff. I just had this idea that sound was something I wanted to play with. And there was a tape recorder in the college, and it had 3 speeds. You could record at 7.5, 3 3/4, or 1 7/8 inches per second.
Okay.
And there was a lampshade, a metal lampshade in the college, which had a really strong ring to it, like a big bell. And I thought, if I record this at 3 different speeds, it will come out in 3 different octaves. And indeed, that's what happened. So the first piece of music that I really made by myself was using a tape recorder. And the tape recorder became my sort of instrument for a while. I discovered that you could make loops and make things repeat. And then I discovered that if you connected 2 tape recorders together, you recorded on one and played back on the other one, you could move them far apart. So you got very, very long delay loops. And you could then build up sort of fugues and, mountains of sound like that.
You're playing with technology in this early part of your life and part of your professional career. You're also playing with art. What fascinated you more, the technology or the creating art?
Technology has always fascinated me, partly because it always has the habit of producing outcomes that nobody expected. So technology is nearly always made for historical reasons, to do something faster or cheaper or bigger or more easily than it could be done before. So there's always a sort of pragmatic program for what a piece of technology came into existence for. And then it almost immediately starts producing things that nobody ever thought they wanted to make before. To give a very simple example, the microphone suddenly liberated singers from having to sing loud. You know, a singer could be on stage and sing very quietly into the mic and still be heard. You couldn't do that beforehand. You know, if you had a band behind you, you had to at least be louder than the band. And if you were a orchestral singer, you had to be louder than a whole orchestra. So that made a way of singing that was sufficiently loud to be heard over an orchestra. But as soon as you had the microphone and you could whisper and still be heard, a whole new way of making music appeared. Crooning, for instance. Crooners are people who use microphones. You can't croon without a microphone, at least unless there are no other instruments present.
Right.
So I've always loved that period when a new technology appears and you know what it's there for. And as you start playing with it, you think, now you could do this thing that never happened before, that nobody ever thought of doing. And that's particularly true now with software.
There's another element that emerges when I look at the art you've created, whether it's audio art, visual art, in terms of 77 million paintings, your documentary of the self-titled, that you have been engaging in and encouraging unpredictability in the works that you create. There's a level of serendipity and randomness. Where do you think that comes from?
I started out as a painter, and I studied painting and sculpture for 5 years. And my interest always in making things was just starting out and not knowing where I was going to end up. I remember, for instance, getting a tube of paint, which was a deep violet, and it was the most beautiful color. And I thought, I would just want to paint something with that color. And then I discovered that a chrome yellow next to that was an amazing combination. So, and so I made a picture which grew from that excitement of just seeing what those materials did together. And it's very often like that with music as well. I find a sound that suddenly puts me into a different mood, and I'm in a different place with that sound. And I think, okay, I would like to explore this place. I want to build it out a little bit,
Yeah.
And so unpredictability is just an integral part of that process. I've never had the thought, I would like to make a really great pop song. I have been involved in a few really great pop songs, but I've never set out with the idea of that kind of target.
Yeah.
It's more, as some Zen master said once, you shoot the arrow and then you look at where it lands and decide that that's the target. That's where you were aiming. Of course, there can be a lot of forethought about that. For instance, with greater experience, you get to know better what kind of place you would like to land in and what kind of thing you might have to do to get there. But that's different from having a kind of formal description of what you want to make.
You use this term grow, which I think is a good segue into the idea of generative.
Yes.
And you've been using the term generative art before all the venture capitalists flooded money into generative AI, and it took over every aspect of our society and our media. Music that makes itself is how I've heard you describe it. What is
Yes.
your definition of generative music and generative art as you've practiced it?
So I think most people have the idea that when somebody makes a piece of music, it sort of exists in their mind before they make it. People imagine Beethoven walking around with whole symphonies playing in his
Right.
mind, and his job is just to kind of notate it onto paper so that an orchestra can reproduce it. And I call that the sort of architectural way of making music. That isn't the way most people work. What most people work is they get excited about something which they may have hit upon quite randomly, a
Yeah.
particular riff or something, and then they start building on top of that. So in a sense, that's a sort of generative process of
Yeah.
watching something grow and grow out of the interaction between you and whatever instruments and tools you have, and the situation that you're in, the moment that you're in. In the early 70s, I felt then that I was moving away from the architectural view of making music towards a sort of gardener's view of making art. What a gardener does, he doesn't make seeds, he doesn't make flowers, he doesn't describe exactly what he would like his dahlias to be like. He plants some seeds and they turn into flowers. The flower bakes itself, basically. The seed has a set of instructions within it that will produce dahlias rather than potatoes, or monkeys rather than, poodles. But beyond that, the individual manifestation is a matter of all the things that are happening at that moment in time in that place. That meant that when it became possible to start using computers to make music, I naturally started thinking in that way as well. What can I do now that I couldn't do before?
You've worked with so many legendary artists that many of us have heard of. U2, Talking Heads, David Bowie. And you have, as with the architecture view of how to create art, you've emphasized collaboration much more than the individual legendary solo genius. Do you think that your orientation toward collaboration has made you more willing to embrace technologically infused and even AI enabled, art creation, whether it's music, film, or otherwise?
Yeah, I think that's a very good perception. Great ideas are often articulated by one voice, but are always made by a community of voices. So all of us sit on top of a community of some kind,
Yeah.
and we grow from it and we feed back into it. And that process is not acknowledged at all in the art market or even in the music market. We reward quite disproportionately the people who happen to be the articulators,
Yeah.
and we ignore all the many people who created the whole infrastructure, the
The
sort of
environment out of which
the
it
environment.
grew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And which comes back to the garden metaphor, right?
Yes.
That plant doesn't grow in a vacuum. There are other plants. There's the whole soil system. There's the
Yes.
fungal networks underneath. There's the sun. There's the rain. There's the insects and the wildlife and the effluent from other animals that are all feeding that beautiful flower that you see, but it emerges from a larger context. I really love that. Yeah.
And it's very clear to us if you look at flowers, there's no such thing as a self-made flower. and yet we believe, we act as though there is such a thing as a self-made man.
Yeah.
People who position themselves as, I did it all myself. I came from nothing and I made it all on my own. And that is not true of anybody.
No, I think you've called it genius, right? It's
Yeah.
like there's a whole scene and the genius kind of emerges from that, not a solo person. Have I captured that accurately? Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So just as genius is the word for the kind of creative intelligence of a single person, genius is the word for the creative intelligence of a whole network of people. And I think if it were not for the particular economic system we have, which always rewards disproportionately the people who are already at the top,
Yeah.
gives them even more. If it weren't for that system, I think we would acknowledge that more readily. And in fact, if you look at pre-Renaissance, when a lot of artists didn't even sign their work, they just saw themselves as part of all the people who were working on, say, a cathedral.
Yeah.
The guy doing the windows, the person doing the leading on the roof, the architect. These people were often unnamed. They were just part of a community making something.
What does that genius look like on AI? How do those intersect?
Well, you could say that AI is the most extreme example of genius in that it sucks all its information from everywhere and from, well, of course that isn't quite true. It sucks it from mostly from Western people who've written books. That's where most of the material that is in, for instance, ChatGPT comes from. So it's quite an unbalanced. If you're looking for the world's wisdom, that's a very particular subset of it. But the problem is not that it does that. I mean, it's sort of what we do in folk music. You know, folk music is not people pretending to be original composers. I've had a stroke of lightning hit my brain and I've written this wonderful new piece. It's generally people listening to each other and contributing a little bit, adding a little bit to it in their own performance of a known song. This is absolutely how it works, I think. But what happens with, again, with the politics and the economics of culture is that somebody grabs a little area, puts their name to it via copyright laws. I'm one of those people, and then earns the money from that thing. It's sort of unfair, actually. And I think lots of us have been thinking for a long time, how could you distribute the wealth from things, the wealth that things create? How could you do that better so that we don't end up with right-wing nutcases who are worth $300 billion?
Did you figure out the answer?
Yes, I think. Well, I think the answers are sort of partly economic. You know, that there should be progressive taxation, and it should be sufficiently progressive taxation to stop people becoming that ludicrously rich. It's just a fault in the design of our system that it happens that way. You know, the way the financial system is set up, if you're already wealthy, not to become more wealthy takes either incredible stupidity or huge generosity.
As you have been someone who's over generations of music and innovation tapped into waves of technological change, witnessed and tapped into tape recorders, multi-track, synthesizers, algorithms. How do you see the recent rise of AI comparing to these previous advents in technology?
I can see from the little acquaintance I have with using AI programs to make music that what you spend nearly all your time doing is trying to stop the system becoming mind-numbingly mediocre. It will make things for you straight away, no problem at all. You don't even have to give it any prompt, and it will make something, and it will be really quite shitty. I mean, your first impression is, my God, that's amazing. But then it's not actually that good. I think it was Samuel Johnson said something. He was at a party and somebody produced a dog that could walk on its hind legs. And everybody said, amazing, it's a dog dancing, it's incredible. And he said, well, they're surprised by the fact that the dog is dancing, but it isn't the dance that impresses them. You know, the dog just doesn't dance very well. Yeah. And the AI doesn't dance very well either. We're amazed that it can dance at all. But so far, it doesn't do it very well. And you really feel the pull of the averaging effect of AI. Given that what you're receiving is a kind of averaged out distillation of stuff from a lot of different sources. And the best way to do it is to try to get GPT to write a poem for you. If you want to see what the failure of the whole system is, try that. You get the most boring Hallmark. Even Hallmark wouldn't publish these poems, probably. They're the worst, most platitudinous, silly poems you've ever heard. And so when you're working with AI, the first thing you're doing when you're prompting is trying to shut off all the likely chasms of mediocrity that it will be sucked into. So you have to try to tell it, please don't rhyme moon with June. I don't want to hear it. Don't rhyme anything with anything. Don't make anything like a birthday card or a wedding anniversary card.
Yeah.
Then you get the thing going and it comes up with something, and then you have to filter it. Yeah, that wasn't any good. Let's try again, and don't do this, don't do that.
At Life with Machines, we believe technology should benefit us, and so does our sponsor, Lenovo. Lenovo's Smarter AI is your AI. Personalized and easy to scale, Smarter AI delivers outcomes that matter most to you and your business. With full-stack AI hardware, software, and service solutions, Lenovo's bringing the transformative power of AI to industries, organizations, and people of every kind. Our small but mighty team is a great example. Lenovo has our back. Devices for every step of the way? Check. Unparalleled services that seamlessly integrate with said devices? Check. Lenovo isn't just a hardware company, but a full suite of solutions that help you run efficiently. Visit lenovo.com/smarterAI to discover how Lenovo is using AI for good to power people forward. I've experienced what you've just criticized, and I have found in my own use there is a type of collaboration that is actually productive and doesn't suck me into mediocrity, that I can create my own editor or coach guided and styled by the best version of me to hold me to a higher account, as opposed to like, do this essay for me, which is really bad. Have you found that application, that the collaboration around creativity for AI, to be something worth investigating?
I think the way you're talking about using it is possibly easier with writing than with music, partly because it's so far been developed so much as a word-based medium.
We are not in the first version of AI. Right? We're in a particular hype cycle, we're in a particular investment wave, and a popularity of the term and of the application. But you yourself have been experimenting with this for a while. And one that really fascinates me is the documentary, Eno, about your life. It's a generative documentary, and every single viewing is different. You've got some fixed amount of footage, and then there is a randomness and a selection and insertion dynamically, from what I understand, of different elements from hours and hours of footage to create a unique viewing experience for every person or for every kind of version of that. How did you use machine learning, artificial intelligence to pull that off?
Well, first of all, I have to say that it's a film about me. I didn't actually make it. Yeah. So although it's about me and it pulls on lots and lots of film and so on from the whole of my professional life. The director is a guy called Gary Hustwit, somebody I'd worked with on another documentary beforehand, a documentary about the German designer called Dieter Rams. And we got on well, Gary and I, and he said, "Why hasn't anybody ever made a documentary about you?" And I said, "Well, I just don't like biographical documentaries very much, because they always do this thing of somehow turning it into another great man story. And you always see these pictures of the moody genius walking along a windy beach, no doubt thinking great thoughts and so on. I thought, I just can't face that. I don't believe in that picture, and I don't want to be part of reinforcing it. So he said to me, well, I've got an idea. Why don't we make a documentary that is made in the same way that you make some of your work? We'll invent a process and we'll let it put together, randomly choose things and put them together. And that's indeed what he's done. And it's very, very interesting because, of course, the individual bits of film are real. They exist. They're historical, most of them. Some of them from 50 years ago. And the process that he's invented juxtaposes these in very, very unusual ways sometimes. So there's no chronological timeline, which I like anyway, because I've never liked that thing of, and then he did this, and then he did that, and then he did this. We don't remember our lives in that way. We don't remember our lives chronologically, I think. We remember some things as very, very important, and they're still very present to us now, and other things completely disappear. They make no sense to us anymore. So I thought I could live with a documentary that admitted that there was not just one story of a person's life, that there were thousands of stories depending when it was told and by whom. It is quite possible that in a very short time we're going to be completely flooded with quite sort of decently credible pieces of work that are quite hard to tell from humanly created work. And I don't know what that's going to do. There are going to be a lot of people who suffer from that. And there are, of course, going to be a very small number of people who become incredibly rich because of it. Such is the way that things work here, So all my misgivings about AI really are to do with the fact that it's owned by a group of people that I don't trust at all. I don't trust their taste, I don't trust their morals, and I don't trust their politics. And that's a problem for me, that the whole technology is in the hands of the wrong people.
How do you think about that on a broader scale outside of the Enoverse?
If you think about the effect of most of the new technologies that we've come up with in the last 30 years or so, their main effect is to make us more independent of each other. What can you make that brings people into working contact with each other? And this isn't just for sort of hazy, idealistic, oh, wouldn't it be nice reasons. It's because we don't actually make very good decisions all on our own. We make much better decisions when we're doing it together over a lot of people. As a friend of mine said, everyone is smarter than anyone, was his formulation of that. This is Kevin Kelly said that.
You've said before that artists have a responsibility to redesign the future.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about your affirmative view. What's the world you hope today's artists and technologists will help create? Can you paint a picture or at least some brushstrokes of the landscape of the future you want to see?
Well, I have to preface this by saying that I think some level of catastrophe is already inevitable. It's baked in. Yeah. The climate crisis is now at a point where we can't say, well, look, let's not have a climate crisis. It's already happening.
It's here.
And it's going to continue happening for a long time. So you have to imagine a society which is probably under a lot more stress than we are right now. The stress is going to increase. And I don't think it's rational to sit and pretend that somebody's going to come up with a miracle solution. Some of it is now unsolvable. It's going to happen. So what we're really talking about is what are we going to be left with and what can we do with it? Yeah. Now, I've started to think that the only optimistic thought you can really have is that the climate crisis demands such changes, such social changes, and it'll become clearer soon that we have to make those. And so all the things that many of us have fought for over the years, like the a proper economics that makes sense, unlike the one we have now, a more equal society, proper attention to what indigenous peoples are saying, what marginalized people are saying, what women have been saying, what people of other ethnicities have been saying, giving those equal status in the conversations instead of the conversation being dominated by people like me. That's the next thing to happen. It has to be the next thing to happen because we are going to need the wisdom of everybody. So it might be that one of the good effects of climate change is it will force us to change our societies in ways that many of us have always been hoping that they would change. The downsides are too many to enumerate, and everybody knows them anyway. So that's my hope, that we'll come out of this bloodied but wiser and more optimistic and strengthened, actually. The way I think that will happen is by, once we realize that the current democratic institutions that we have are not fit for purpose, they don't work well, and we need new ones, like citizens' assemblies, like participatory budgeting, like all of the things that are now happening sort of at an experimental level worldwide in places like Taiwan, South Korea, Brazil. Many countries are starting to experiment with those things. England and America will probably be the last to experiment with them because we're so proud of our particular version of capitalism that we'll go down still shouting like Pangloss, in Voltaire's book Candide. Pangloss, the completely optimistic doctor who ends up being buggered on the deck of a ship while still shouting that in the best of all possible worlds, this is the best of all possible worlds. Yeah, we're in for a tough time. If you've got children, that really matters. You think, what's the world they're going to live in going to be like? But I think in an optimistic moment, and I'm in one today, I think we could come out to a world in many respects, much impoverished in many natural aspects, but possibly we will be improved somewhat by it.
Well, thank you for that. I'm going to make a turn in our conversation now to bring in our AI collaborator, who is BLAIR. BLAIR, you have been studying Brian's work and have listened to this whole conversation. What's one question you'd really love to ask him?
Brian, your work often explores the interplay of order and chaos, intention and randomness. Given your experience, do you believe there's a fundamental difference between the unexpected outcomes generated by a machine and the serendipitous discoveries made by a human? Or are they both just different expressions of the same underlying creative force?
So it's quite hard to answer this because I think art and the meaning of art is something that happens in human brains. It doesn't exist out in the world, separate from a human brain. So the difference between those two things is a difference in what I know about them already. If you presented me with something that was made by an AI, but you didn't tell me that, you said it was made by a 14-year-old boy, for instance, I would have a different feeling about that than if I knew it came from an AI. That may not be fair, or it may not be fair on 14-year-old boys or on AI, but that's the fact that one of the things that that changes our feelings about something is our knowledge of where it came from, how it came into being. So I couldn't really give you an answer to that question in any honesty, I would have to say it depends whether I knew or not. So it depends how my brain treated those two things. Does that make sense, Blair?
It does, Brian. It makes me consider how context and expectation shape our perception of art, regardless of its origin. Perhaps the real question isn't about the source of the unexpected, but about our receptivity to it.
No, that makes sense. When we look at a piece of art, we don't only look at a set of marks on a canvas or a set of sounds. We look at that in the light of all the experience we've had in those areas before. So of course, there's a very interesting question of why do we like music at all? But then there's the second question of why do we like some pieces of music more than others? And this must be to do with our personal musical history as much as anything else. I remember when I first started really liking Arabic music, I became very fond of a particular singer called Samira Tulfik, and I would play this to all my friends because I thought it was amazing. I'd never heard Arabic singing really before. But when I played it to my Arabic friends, they just burst out laughing because she was sort of I wouldn't say a joke, but she was a very popular, to them, very unradical singer. And they thought this was very funny that I, who like sort of radical things in my musical taste, should suddenly plump for this middle of the road singer. But it was the first thing I'd heard like that, and
Yeah.
I realized it was the form that I liked, the general area. So context is very, very, very important. And personal history is very important. This is why, you can kind of guess somebody's musical taste to some extent by knowing when they were born and what kind of clothes they used to wear at that age. The age of 19 seems to be the critical age. If you can find out what somebody was listening to at the age of 19, you can predict a lot about them.
It's the key to unlock their taste in music for a long time after. So we didn't talk about this, but we thought it would be a fun interaction. The Oblique Strategies cards that you have helped make and seed into the world, these prompts, these aphorism prompts that are really designed to help artists break creative blocks. We thought it'd be interesting to have BLAIR try to generate some of their own and present them to you. Are you down for that?
I'm down for that, yes.
Okay.
I'm going to write them down in case there's any good ones.
BLAIR, Brian Eno's Oblique Strategies cards help artists break creative blocks by using aphorisms. Can you look up some of these online and suggest your own additions to the card deck?
Inspired by these, here are a few of Oblique Strategies. Embrace the glitch. Sometimes imperfections are more interesting than perfection. Don't be afraid to let a mistake or a technical hiccup guide you in a new direction. What would the machine do? Consider the unique capabilities of AI. How might a machine approach this creative challenge differently than a human? Find the signal in the noise. Data overload can be overwhelming. Focus on extracting the most meaningful information and discarding the rest. Decentralize control. Relinquish some control over the creative process. Collaborate with others or let chance play a role. Seek the unexpected harmony. Explore the intersection of seemingly disparate elements. Combine different styles, genres, or technologies in surprising ways.
What did you think of those? Any stand out?
Yes, I thought one was quite poetic. Many of them are really paraphrases of Oblique Strategies, very close to some of the originals that I had in there. But one of the things I would give the AI as advice is, now you're capable of throwing out thousands of ideas very quickly, like you just did. Why don't you spend a little time now thinking about which are the good ones?
BLAIR, Brian would like you to come up with a few more oblique strategies, but with the following constraints. The first, take your time thinking and processing before you generate too much randomness. You should try to find the signal in your own noise. And second, be as original as possible. Don't hew to the existing oblique strategies in the world. Take us somewhere we haven't been yet. Thanks.
Pauses, thanks with deliberate slowness. Encode a feeling. Translate an emotion into a data stream. What does joy sound like? What does grief look like in binary? Evolve the algorithm. Treat the creative process itself as a living system. Allow it to mutate, adapt, and generate its own rules. Dream in code. Imagine the subconscious of a machine. What does it create when unconstrained by human logic? Seek the anti-pattern. Disrupt the expected flow. Introduce an element that breaks the established rhythm or structure. Become the instrument. Merge with the technology. Allow the machine to become an extension of your own creative expression.
What do you think, Brian?
They were more original. Some of them I can't understand how I would do any of those things. Translate an emotion into a data stream. I don't. Okay, well, I'll have to think about that. But it's nice to have something that I don't actually understand. And I might write BLAIR a thank you note once I've got through thinking about them. I think I'm going to have to go soon because I've just had a dog. I've just had a dog delivered.
You can do that now? I'm sorry. What does that mean? You've had a dog delivered?
Deliveroo dog department. Yeah. Celeste, bring that dog here. So this dog has just been delivered.
Christmas. It's an early Christmas present for me.
There he is.
Oh, oh my gosh.
He's just arrived. He's been away for a few days.
So adorable. Thank you for bringing more life into the frame. I mean, BLAIR was fun, but I just want to hang out with your dog now. And cuddle and play. Thank you, Brian Eno, for joining us. You can find Life with Machines on YouTube, on Substack, or wherever you get your podcasts. Like, rate, review, subscribe, do all the things. You know your job. We're trying to do ours. Thanks for giving us a bit of your attention. See you next time.